Drew, that's it on the script. But I'm gonna go off-roading a little bit because it's a rare occasion we have you in studio here in Nashville. I want to talk about something that went down yesterday. Was that the All-American Bowl on NBC announced that they will now be accepting juniors this upcoming year for the All-American Bowl. It's something you and I have had a lot of dialogue about, been conversations around it, and I think a lot of that conversation started after this year. And you talk about the trickle-down effect, and I think a lot of people will ask, well, what do you mean by that, the trickle-down effect? I mean, this starts with Christian McCaffrey, who I think was the first of his kind to step out and say, I'm not playing in a bowl game, and I think that was a New Year's Six Bowl at the time. You've seen that kind of radiate now through college football, now where it's a normalcy, right? Now, with the All-American Bowl in high school, these players are starting to enroll earlier, get to campus sooner, and then practice with their teams, which there's a lot of value in that. You would understand why a player would want to get to campus early, get as many reps as possible, and start to understand and have a continuity of what's expected of them. We had 6 quarterback invites this past year, right? The original 6 that went out. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, none of those 6 who originally accepted ended up playing in the game. Now we see this pivot to juniors. You had a lot to do with this decision. Break it down in terms of the thought process and kind of what went into that.
We're responding to what the market is telling us. Okay, me and you always talk about the All-American Bowl kind of being like the Senior Bowl, which we just saw this past weekend down in Mobile. Jim Nagy, friend of the show, does an excellent job. And what did you see with the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl? Underclassmen allowed to play for the first time. The NFL has realized, okay, just with the declarations, what's going on, we need to allow these younger guys to play. Flip over to our game. You said it, 6 quarterback invites. There's actually 13 quarterback invites that went out for the 2024 edition of the game. And it took 13 to get 6. I remember when every single one of those invites went out. I mean, heck, I was the one that invited Jaden Davis after the FBU freshman All-American game. I remember when CJ Carr got it after the National Combine. At the time, those were like big moments for those kids. And just with how the game has progressed, college football playoff programs want these kids to come in and get their feet wet, get them in that bowl setting, right? Help them prepare for the Rose Bowl or whatever bowl game they're in. Look, I get it. I mean, absolutely do that. But I feel like we've gotten to the point where the on-field competition has turned into more of like a Pro Bowl of sorts, and that's I don't think what NBC wanted. I don't think that's what the All-American Bowl wanted. I think they wanted the best product available. And this isn't a knock on recent years' games. I thought the 2024 game was excellent, but it's only going to get worse in terms of the opt-outs and the guys that are moving away. Think about the college football playoff going from 4 teams to 12 teams, and it's also starting a week earlier. So now it's going to be a race if you're committed to one of these 12 programs, and there could be, 16 teams in the mix? You're trying to graduate early. You're trying to get there as fast as you can. You can get all the bowl gifts. You can go through practices. You can start getting your NIL checks. Everyone's going to be wanting to do that. And then when we look at it, all right, everything's so accelerated right now. The juniors, they're going to want to play in this game. They're going to need to play in this game. You want to make a name for yourself? You want to get evaluated not only by me and you and the rest of the team at 24/7 Sports, all the colleges are going to be tuned in because they're going to want to know how big this individual is. What does he look like best on best? So, we met in San Antonio. I thought it was the direction that we should go. Get some juniors in the game. Initially there's been some pushback in different areas. I think everyone's going to want to be in it. And Coop, it's going to be like that practice we had on Wednesday, the joint practice. You said it was the best, 2 hours we got out of the 18 days of all-star events we did. Competition was ramped up. And I think when the juniors have an opportunity to not only climb in the rankings, but to elevate their stock, you're talking about a kid you keep using the example of Lincoln Kienholz. Think about Gatlin Bair, right? Gatlin Bair, junior year. Yeah, we know he's fast. No one knows what he looks like against the nation's top corners. I mean, he's a kid. It's self-corrected. He ended up at Oregon. But there was a time he was going to Boise State, So I love this decision. I'm excited, and the feedback I've gotten from Eric Richards, who was the director of recruiting for the game, A lot of people are fired up.
Multiple examples now and how it changes, and people might say, okay, well, that's not that significant of a change. But if you think about it, it is significant because the game would take place in January. And because the majority, we're over 93, 94% of the top 247 had already signed in December, the hay was in the barn for the majority of these guys, right? You mentioned a guy like Gatlin Barrett at the time had already kind of whittled down his choices to 2 programs. You mentioned Gatlin Barrett. What about a guy like TJ Moore? You and I trying to figure out, and the rest of the scouting team trying to figure out the receivers, the top players in the country. We feel like we have a pretty good feel for it. TJ Moore in that game, heading to Clemson, by the way, newly minted 5-star, goes out and has 2 or 3 touchdowns, 165 yards receiving, and completely changes the perception of what type of player we feel that he can be after seeing good on good and after seeing 19 of the top 20 receivers in the country over the last 3 weeks before. Now you think about a guy like that doing that before he's even played 1 game of his senior season. Think about the unintended, maybe intended consequences of this game for a guy like TJ Moore that says, hey, I just went out on the same field as Jeremiah Smith, who's ranked the #1 player in the country and is a generational talent, and I was pound for pound the best player there. And think about that. I can see it already. The people in the ear of these players, the people ultimately at the end of the day that are going to have conversations with the program saying, hey, the price just went up. And this is why, because everybody saw it. It was on NBC. It was a nationally televised game. You saw good on good. And my guy just beat the #1 corner in the country or a top 5 rated player at his position. And this is what it looks like. So you think about that. And then you also think about a guy like Lincoln Kineholz, who was committed to Washington, was from South Dakota. You don't get to see in that setting very often. You maybe get to see it once. You think about his trajectory changing. And guess what? He ended up at Ohio State. I think ultimately at the end of the day, his recruitment kind of evened out. I think what's going to happen now, these recruitments in terms of where these guys eventually end up is going to be accelerated by 6 months. And that's what we're going to see. So I think it's going to be fascinating because I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about it. But I think it's going to have a huge ripple effect on college football recruitment, especially at the top of the game. And then if you're one of those second-tier programs, right, we're talking about Boston College. Like, what happens if you're Minnesota and you got Corey Parrish, who's the MVP of that game, committed to you, and you've done a good job. He's from the state of Minnesota. Kept him under wraps. But God forbid somebody says, you know what, I want to see that player in that game. He goes out, does what he does. Now you got to play defense all the way until signing day, until December. That's a long time. This game's in January. We're talking about 11 months. So you think about that, those type of players, I think there's going to be a little bit of a push and pull. I think some of these programs that maybe have those guys committed are going to say, I don't want you playing in that game. And if you do, you might lose your spot. But I can see all of that happening here as this game starts to change.
Well, I know we're up against the clock. 2 thoughts. What makes the NFL Combine what it is? You don't know where these guys are going, right? I know we're kind of in the demographic and we're sickos, and I'll watch all 5 days of the Combine, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. But there's buzz around the NFL draft because you don't know where these guys are going to go. We are going to create that with the All-American Bowl. Yes, some of them will be committed, but there's going to be a guy that shows up and measures in with 36-inch arms, and you're going to be sitting at home. You're going to be like, I want that guy at my team. What did Tom Loy say when he checked in? So I think we're going to create some excitement there. And the second thing is, we just made our lives harder. Like, the decision to go younger is only coming back on the scouting team at 24/7 Sports and Eric Richards and the guys at the All-American Bowl. We have to identify guys, and it's not going to be easy. But I think we have the group of people to do it. We have the software to do it. We have the resources to do it. We have to go find these guys before the colleges do. And what are we going to do? We're going to lean heavily on traits, multi-sport verifieds. I mean, it's easy to pick a bunch of guys when they're on the national scene. No, we're going to have to get out, the magnifying glass. We're going to have to go find them.
It'll be a fun exercise for the boys at 24/7 Sports. And like Drew mentioned, that game will be brought to you in January. Starting this upcoming year, juniors will be allowed to play in that game. Guys, thanks again for stopping by.